chunks of disposable income. 10K a year is good. And then this. Now this is my trusty old Minolta SRT 101 series camera. I've got several of these. I've used them for astrophotography and as well as on for volcano trips. They're beat up, they got character marks on them, but they were a good camera. Now, remember in the old days, before auto guiding, you remember, you guys remember film, right? This is when you had to use a separate guide scope and a separate guide star. You'd put that star right down in that square box and just guide on it for 40 minutes or so. That was insane. But here's one of the frustrations about that. Here's a shot of the moon. I got some meteors. Got the Great Orion Nebula in it. An open cluster all in one frame. Now, this is caused because it's really weird because astronomers spend thousands of dollars on eyepieces, thousands of dollars on telescope, but they want to save on film. So when they load it in the camera, they'll load it in there so that the sprocket wheels just connect to that one set of sprockets. Second set hadn't even got there yet. They close the camera up. Now the pressure plate puts enough pressure on it so that when you go to advance it, it doesn't have enough strength to advance the film, so it just rips the sprocket holes out. And you're sitting there, every time you wind in the camera, nothing's happening. So you get through, the counter says you're out of film. So you go to rewind it. You release the clutch, you go, boy, that was quick. Now, big clue here. If you're going to take long exposures, you got to be sure of one thing. You got to set it on the B setting for bulb. Nothing is more frustrating than to guide for 40 minutes, only to find out that your exposure was over 40 minutes ago because you forgot to change that. Now, it could get worse. You could do this with no film in the camera at all. And another fun thing is taking long exposures with the lens cap on. Back in those days with film, we had a problem called reciprocity failure. Reciprocity failure is simply the film's inability to collect useful data to get a latent image. Film is made just for short periods of time, a fraction, a 125th of a second. That's what it was designed for. But there were two methods for correcting this. You could either use gas hypering the film, or using a specially built cold camera. Now, with gas hyperization, involves baking the film in a gas under slight pressure at an elevated temperature for a length of time. The gas is usually hydrogen and a mixture of hydrogen and nitrogen. They inhibit the recording of the faint amount of light that hits the film's emulsion from a distance to incredibly faint astronomical objects. Well, that's what it says about what it's supposed to do. So here's a typical little setup. You cook this in an oven for several hours, it'll hyper the film. The problem with it was that you had to use hypered film rather quickly because it didn't last long. Once it was hypered, you had to use it pretty quick. Needless to say, there are other considerations to take into consideration when you're putting hydrogen in it. So, cold camera use. Cold cameras use dry ice to get the film down to about minus 70 degrees Fahrenheit. This helps to reduce the reciprocity failure and it almost gives you no loss of color in the film. Now the dry ice, we used to just store the dry ice in, I had 4-quart thermos bottles. And I would crush the dry ice up, put it in a thermos bottle and lightly screw the cap on. Don't ever screw it on real tight because it'll end up exploding, and then put it in a freezer. So you can store the dry ice in a thermos bottle or two. But great caution should be done when you're using that too, because you also put coffee in a thermos. And if you put the coffee in the Jack Newton will tell you a good story about that. This is me with the cold camera trying to figure out how to make it work on my 10-inch scope. And I needed to make some adjustments to the scope. I had to move the main mirror forward because to get to the camera, I had to get the focus outside. So that was one problem. I had to remove the trunnions. I had to put a different focuser on it, and I wanted to install rotating rings. I didn't like the idea of a guide scope. So what I did is I took the same telescope and I cut a great big 8-inch hole where the original focuser was. And I built a platform that housed the focuser. Now, this screw here and this screw here, this holds it in. This metal plate comes out completely. This whole thing can be removed. This is the other plate. This is with the camera. So I can use it either as a regular focuser with eyepieces or put the camera on there. The camera goes right here. Eyepiece and a triple Barlow goes here. Now, if I loosen these screws up, this whole platform rotates 360 degrees. And if I took it out, this is a pair of binocular prisms that also rotates around. So I had no problem at all with that area finding a guide star. I reduced my exposures from an hour down to about 15 minutes on most objects with this system. It's really kind of cool. CCD imaging. This is another ball of wax. I'm still not comfortable with this. I'm still trying to get used to it because I have, I get challenged by the processing software and cable hookups. You want a nice system. This is a very neat system. This is a Bill Williams system over in Chiefland. It's nice, clean, cables stored neatly. I failed the neatness test on that. In the end, I did manage to get a few images. Here's the Great Orion Nebula. Just to show you that I didn't screw everything up. This is Mars with a little 105 ETX. A distance shot. I zoomed in. You did a close-up shot. Great gas giant. Another great gas giant. Don Parker. The Owl of the Pussycat. 2 stories to tell here. I'll do the Pussycat story first. At that first winter star party, Billy Dodd had a black cat. And as I said, it was awful dewy that night. So we laid the telescope down parallel to the ground, and we're all standing around BSing and telling jokes and stuff because it was cloudy. And all of a sudden I hear this crash, bang. What the hell is that? I turned around and I see this cat scurrying away from my scope. Now, I had just picked the scope up. I had not even paid for it yet. I go over to the scope and look, and there's a hole this big in the styrofoam. Billy Dodd's cat jumped up into the front where the eyepiece, in the front of the telescope, looked down, saw his own self in there, and was going to attack it. Got down there to where the trusses widened, fell through. Blew a hole in my scope. I hadn't paid for it. First thing we did the next day was go buy epoxy and glue the thing back in. Couldn't find Billy's cat. Billy was smart. Billy hid the cat. And he hid it for 7 years. Now, the next time we had the owl, We were doing a joint thing with the Audubon Society down in Flamingo. We went to Flamingo, we set up some catadioptric scopes and looking at the bird rookery during the daytime off of Flamingo, and then at night we were going to take the Audubon people out to Mahogany Hammock and let them get their thrill of Jupiter, because Jupiter was nice and high in the sky. So while we were out there, we had Jupiter up there. Now I've got the 18 is a long scope, and we were up on the top of the ladder. Jupiter was straight overhead. But it was beautiful. I'm up on top of the ladder, and I'm trying to get it, and I said, boy, this is great. This would look good with a filter. So I asked for a filter, and I took the eyepiece out. And when I took the eyepiece out, I kind of looked in there. After I put the filter on, I was getting ready to put it back in, and I looked, and it looked like it had, instead of 4 spider veins, there was 5. I said, what the hell is that? It looked like the mirror was cracked. So I climbed down the ladder, lower the scope, turned on the flashlight, turned it on, and there's this owl crap sliding down my mirror. To this day, I never look straight up. Mike Reynolds was there that night. It actually etched the scope mirror that I had to have it recoded. But I never observe overnight. I'll say, oh, I'll wait till it passes. It's going. Halley's Comet, this one of my images from '86. This was one of the most frustrating nights I ever had with astrophotography. Don Parker and myself, we went down to Long Key State Park right here in the Keys to photograph this. And I set my 10, I got my 10 inches, you notice, was on a tripod type mount. Don had a little 6-inch scope that he just plopped down in the roadway, kicked it, said that's about right, got the camera on there, and he's going to town already. And I got mine plopped down, all set up, counterbalanced and weighted and everything, and looked up and there's a tree. I can't see Polaris, so I have to star drift. So I'm pissed about that to begin with, because Parker's sitting over there. I already got one shot. How you doing, Tip? Now you want to kill him when he does that, so I get it just about right again, and what would happen, I'm in the sand. Telescope shifted a little bit. It spent me hours before I finally got wood underneath the tripod leg so it wouldn't settle anymore to get this image, but Parker had about 10 images before I even got one. Now, Jack Newton and I have been friends for about 25 years. He taught me a lot about astrophotography, and he built my first cold camera for me. He taught me a valuable lesson about serious imaging. We were up at his place in British Columbia testing some Konica 1600 2¼ film. And we were in the observatory. And I was taking a photograph of Andromeda Galaxy or something like that, and I was about 15 minutes into the exposure, and Patty was up there, my wife, and they're running around playing grab ass in the observatory, running around, and 15 minutes into the exposure, Patty runs into the counterweights. Plunk, I said, God, and you know, I said, oh gee, look what you did. So I had to take the camera out, defrost it out, change it all out, get it all back up again. Got back in, about 15 minutes into the exposure, Jack kicks the thing. He says, I did it that time. So serious astrophotography should never be attempted at star parties either. We had another public event, and 2 of us wanted to take images. So what we did, we set up, 100 yards from where the main group was. And the guy sets up a little C8 next to us, and we told him, you know, we're doing astro imaging here tonight. You know, you should go up there and set up there. He said, oh, don't, I won't bother you a thing. I won't bother a thing. So I'm into an exposure, and all of a sudden it's like a boloid. He had one of them Coleman camping lanterns under the tripod that he lit up. He's selling He's selling his telescope and wanted people to see it. So I politely said, "Gee whiz, sir." He profoundly apologized and said, I won't do it again. Well, it wasn't a half hour later, I was into another exposure. There goes the light on again. I'm about ready to reach for the 357 Magnum. And my wife goes over to him with we carry those black garbage bags, you know, the plastic garbage. She throws the bag over his light and says, "I'm doing you a big favor. If you take that bag off, my husband's going to shove this light right up your ass." Other frustrations. Getting a building permit for the observatory in Marion County. This was a horrible situation where I retired. I moved up to Ocala, Florida. They said that I went to the building and zoning department, and they said, "Well, you can't get a permit to build the observatory unless you get a licensed Florida state architect to approve your plans for 125-mile-an-hour winds." So I go to an architect, and we're talking about it, and I'm talking about roll-off roof. He says, "Roll-off roof? What do you mean roll? The roof rolls off." "Oh, you need a structural engineer for that." So I go to a structural engineer. "Oh, you need a mechanical engineer for that." I said, "Gee, tent, no engineer required." I purchased this for several $1,000s cheaper than what I was going to pay for the other. It works perfect. So I'm glad I did that. Now let's look at some rewards. Needless to say, you'll meet some of the nicest people you'll ever meet in this field. I've got friends from all over the world that I've met here. I even met a guy from Iran, and that turned out to be a cat lover. So I sent him a picture of my cat, Tonka, and he sent me a picture of his cat. Public star parties, a great and rewarding way to introduce newcomers to the night sky. When asked by the Florida Trail Association to give a lecture and put on a star party for their group, Alachua Club members and Southern Cross members, Fred Heinrich, our registrars, and Lucille, David Lyles, and my precious, we gave a talk for them and held a little star party, and they just had a great time. There was probably one of my greatest rewards at a public outreach star party was at Chiquita State Park many years ago, probably in the very early 80s. And we were looking around at stuff, and a woman came up to me with a young girl. The girl was about 14 years old. And she says, "Would you show my daughter that bright star there?" And I looked up and I saw Venus. I said, and I wanted to show off how smart I was because I'm an amateur astronomer. I said, "That's not a star, that's a planet." She says, "I don't care. Could you show it to my daughter anyway?" I said, "Sure." So I took the girl by the hand and led her over to the telescope, put her hand up on with the focusing knob. I said, "Here, just look through here and focus it till it's good for you." Well, she lets out a scream. And I jumped back and I both hands. I didn't touch her. What, She says, I can see it. I'm saying, "Gee, visual acuity, Venus, brightest thing up there, you ought to be able to see it." The mother started crying, the girl started crying, and you wonder what, you don't forget that. These give you great rewards. I've enjoyed these over the years. I've seen a lot of them. One of the most spectacular that I ever saw was Hakataki. I drew this because it was near the Big Dipper, and the comet's tail stretched so you couldn't photograph it. The comets, and I remember now that I see Steve nodding his head. I remember when this happened because every time I would tell Steve, I'd say, "Boy, we saw the comet tonight. We saw it. It was 15 degrees long tail." And he'd write back, "I saw it. It was 25 degrees long." No, next night, "Hey, I saw it. It was 50." He said 75. The night that I drew this, this comet's tail was 120 degrees. It stretched clear back over your head, back to Corvus. Another thing that was exciting was Shoemaker Levy 9. This comet was discovered March 23rd, 1993, and was anticipated to strike Jupiter in 94. Here's a picture of myself. Boy, I didn't have gray hair then. Photoshop. This is with Jeff Bish and Jeff Bish 16. We both worked for Eastern at the time, and well, no, Jeff didn't, because that was I think they had laid off. Anyway, we were photographing. Steve O'Meara had come down, if I remember correctly. Steve was there. Jeff Bish was the first person to see two celestial bodies collide. He was credited with the first one to discover the impact. We were fortunate enough that we were able to, Jeff would have the telescope set up and ready and running on Jupiter during the daytime, and we'd start making drawings at that time. Kind of the neat thing about it was that the fragments had separated to an area where they were going to be impacting every 10 hours. And the rotation on the planet is about 9 hours and 50 minutes, so that they would be coming in one right after the other. And Dr. Hernandez, Carlos Hernandez, and Jeff would try to get me to draw. I don't draw anywhere near like Steve does, but my first attempts at drawing that was my first drawing that I ever made of a planet. And it kind of worked out pretty cool because it was almost like Don's of the same time. I was able to make these drawings in the daytime when I got off work. Now, meteor showers and boloids, they're always rewarding. If you're lucky enough to see a bolide or two, sooner or later you're going to see a truly spectacular meteor shower, such as the storm of 2002. Probably one of the best meteor showers I ever saw was at Chiefland. I don't know how many people we have over at Chiefland that night, Vic, do you remember?
Hundreds.
We had hundreds of them for sure. It was during the Leonids, and it started raining them things about 9 o'clock at night, and we stayed up all night in it cracking daylight, and you look up and they're just pouring down on us. I think there was something like 2,000 an hour. Mars flares. This was truly a great experience for me. A couple of Japanese observers in 1958 had made note that they thought they saw a flash on Mars. And of course, in those days, you couldn't record a flash, with film or anything like that. But Tom Dobbins and Bill Sheehan replotted the location of Mars and determined that in June of 2001, Mars would be ideally located from the Florida Keys in almost the same positions that the flares took place in 1958. And in doing so, Dobbins set up an expedition to come down here. My brother-in-law owned a property, a house in Cudjoe Key, just south of here, about 10 miles. So we set up a camp there. at my brother-in-law's house. This is, wrong button. That's Dan Troiani, Carolyn Peterson, Mark Peterson, David Moore, myself, Gary Saronic, Rick Feinberg and Patty. That was just part of the crew. Bob Bitzenthaler, who's passed, has been there. Tim Parker from JPL was there. Tom Dobbins, Don Parker was there. Lou Ireland, Scott and Lou, and Maurizio Desculio from Italy. So we set up my 12-inch Meade. Here's Dobbins making there's the scope that Parker set up and beat my butt with and shooting that comet picture. There's Maurizio, Richard Feinberg, myself. Got the camera ready. Here you can see on the monitor, there's Mars. I'm looking at the monitor. Peterson, Rick, this is all set up. We had set up several telescopes, and we were video recording at the same time all the way through. Now, our primary area of interest was right here in the Edom Promontorium Basin and the Schiaparelli crater near Sinus Sabaeus and Meridiani. That's where we were looking. That was the area of interest, right in this area here. And this is you're going to see here, we were fortunate that we captured it. The event happened, and this is the only known video in the world of the event. There's the brightening of it right there. It lasted about 2 minutes each. We had several flares. So there are many ways to do outreach, and I just love it. I've attended major star parties each year. I've lectured all over the place. Public star parties are a great way to do outreach. This is what we called the first, if you saw Steve's talk yesterday, this was the first, another picture from the Montserrat volcano where we were showing the natives there. They were just great. We had shown almost 2,000 people. Most of them never saw through a telescope before. This is the scope I'm using now. So I found out that over the years there are a lot less frustrations and more rewards. We get over them and learn from our mistakes, so mistakes as we get older, they diminish. That's inside the dome, and that's my dome there. I like to think of myself as a celestial pirate. I consider the heavens my personal treasure chest. With each celestial object, I have a new gem. And each night I go out, I open my treasure chest, look up some old gems, find some new ones. And when I find a new treasure on my own, it's a personal and individual discovery that I can't wait to share with others. Now, these jewels aren't mine to keep, but to admire and share with all who care to sail the celestial seas with me. And I've been told that Charlie Perillo has gathered up all the stray light. We've shipped it off. And God ought to do that. You like that? Thank you.